What does the right of access to adequate housing entail? Welcome to the Civics Academy Constitutional Rights series. These videos explore some of our constitutional rights and the institutions designed to support and enforce them. In order to assert our rights, we need to know their meaning and what they include. To use our democratic institutions appropriately, we need to understand their mandate and how they function. This video deals with the right of access to adequate housing in Section 26 of the Constitution. What does the right of access to adequate housing include? Section 26(1) and 2 of the Constitution grant everyone the right to access to adequate housing. The state must take reasonable steps within the resources available to it to ensure that over time, more and more people are able to access adequate housing. Section 26(3) states that no one may be evicted from their home or have their home demolished without an order of court. This section prohibits arbitrary evictions. What does this right require the state to do? The right of access to housing does not require the state to provide every person with housing immediately. The right does oblige the state to take reasonable steps within the resources that are available to ensure that more and more people will have better access to housing over time. The state must create conditions that ensure houses can be built and that people who can afford to are able to buy them. The banks play a role in realizing this right. For people who cannot afford to pay for housing, the state must build houses and devise a fair system of allocation. It is illegal to give out houses based on favors or bribes. The state must have a plan to give effect to the right to housing in the long term and must implement it in an effective and efficient manner as fast as possible. The state funds allocated to the building of houses may not be diverted. They must be used for their intended purpose effectively and efficiently. The right not to be evicted without a court order. Section 26(3) of the Constitution protects against eviction without a court order. This rule applies regardless of whether the person is the owner or the tenant. This rule also applies to illegally erected shacks on municipal land or illegally occupied houses. A court will rely on the Prevention of Illegal Eviction from and Unlawful Occupation of Land Act, which is a piece of housing legislation when deciding on whether to grant an eviction order. This act protects the people from unlawful evictions and requires the court to consider a number of factors. For example, whether proper notice of proceedings was given to the tenant. But the court will also consider other factors. Firstly, people should not be evicted if it will render them homeless. Usually, the court will ask whether the relevant authority, usually the municipality, will provide temporary alternative accommodation to those facing homelessness. The state's duty to provide alternative accommodation applies when the state or private landowners evict people. Secondly, people facing eviction should be given a meaningful opportunity to participate in resolving the matter. This means the person or body who wants to evict must speak to those who would be evicted to try and find an alternative solution. This will often involve negotiations between municipal officials, private landowners, communities, and the organizations supporting them. Thirdly, evictions that might lead to homelessness always involve the state, which must provide emergency housing and minimize the suffering that an eviction may cause. Summary. The Constitution guarantees everyone the right of access to adequate housing. This does not entitle everyone to immediately demand a house from the state. Instead, it requires the state to take reasonable steps, including the building of houses, to provide more and more people with housing over time as resources become available. People may not be evicted without a court order, which will only be granted if the court believes that it is just and equitable to do so.